Welcome back. Today I wanted to go over a Reddit question from the official Neville Goddard group that I thought was very interesting because it was posted just recently. And it asks, do we have to die in this reality? Now I have a link to this post in the description box below because I don't know if the people would appreciate it if I were to mention their names through actual videos. So I'll keep them anonymous to that extent, but you can find the post in the description box below from who asked it and what the answers were from other people. Now I wanted to go over this myself because I find death a very interesting subject. Not because of a suicidal reason or because I don't like being alive physically. It's more like it is one of the greatest mysteries that if we can somehow get some grip over it, it might explain a lot more about this physical journey that we're going through in the meantime. Or at least it takes the edge of a lot of the issues we face and struggles we have. Because ultimately we realize, as the Buddhists would say, this too shall pass. No matter how bad things get, it shall pass, for example. That's just one way that you can use it to your advantage to contemplate the subject. But now let's go over the question they asked on Reddit. They said the following. I heard a Neville lecture many months back. Don't remember which one it was, on YouTube. He mentioned how he did funeral arrangement for a friend of his, and he also mentioned shifting to another reality where this friend was still alive. Neville has mentioned going to different realities several times and coming back here, and everything here is as same as before. He lived in this reality till his death. My question is, do we have to physically die in this reality before passing on to a different one? What will happen if I shift permanently and don't come back here? Now, it's a very fascinating question, to say the least, because most people don't even think about this to begin with. They either don't want to think of death, it's such a uncomfortable subject, or they already assume that there will be nothing at all. It will just be oblivion, which is fine too if you want to believe that. Now, I personally don't believe in that necessarily, so when we go to that last part of this person's question, Neville has mentioned going to different realities several times and coming back here, and everything here is the same as before. He lived in this reality till his death. Now, my question is, do we have to physically die? Well, of course we do, because ultimately, from any perspective that we look at this, physically speaking, everything grows and it dies. It can function, or it can be here physically speaking, for a very, very long time, depending on the substance that we're talking about. When we're talking about the human body itself, well, they, on average might get around 80 years old and then they stop functioning. I mean, that's sort of how it goes for most people. Some grow way older than that, it's very true. But there's also others that, pass away way younger than that. That's also a fact of life. So do we have to physically die in this reality before passing on to a different one? Yes, but I think what's more interesting about this question is that the person seems to kind of wonder whether it's perhaps also possible to avoid this. That's why they asked what will happen if I shift permanently and don't come back here. Well, if you're talking about shifting permanently into another dimension, well, what would happen if you don't come back here? Well, it's simple. What would happen is that you would end up being dead to the people that are still in this dimension. So that could potentially explain people that die out of nowhere. You never know for sure. If there's no proper cause of death, in some cases, who knows? Their conscience may have decided to leave and never come back for whatever reason. You don't know that for sure. In most cases, doctors will try and find a reason for death. They did the same with Neville when he passed away. But he would say in one of his lectures, and sadly I don't remember the exact lecture, but he would literally say it himself, that if he decides not to return to his body, he will simply pass away over here. And people will try to figure out how he died and give some reason for it, even though he knows in his own consciousness and soul that he simply decided not to come back to his body any longer. So yes, that is what happens, and yes, it is possible to sort of, you could say, skip death, but it's more like perhaps you're not so much aware of what happens to your body. This one I cannot confirm from personal experience for obvious reasons. But you can either physically pass away and go through a sickness or perhaps an accident or something else that has an issue with your body and you're aware of it and you know you're dying. Well, it might be an uncomfortable experience, that's true, and that's what's awaiting all of us potentially. But if you were to step into another dimension by first letting the body fall asleep, you could, in theory, leave the body and never come back, and therefore don't experience necessarily perhaps the death of your own body to as great an extent as someone who is still mostly functioning in this so-called time-space reality. This is absolutely fascinating to consider, but at the same time, I would dare to say that it takes a pretty aware and perhaps trained person to pull this off, because it would mean total control over your own consciousness to such an extent that you could even do this at will, where you could at will leave your body consistently whenever you please, and then you come back. That's what we do when we dream. We could say you go out of your body, or at least your consciousness is focused on another part of this universe, within this universe itself, perhaps on a different dimension altogether. That's why you can't physically spot the places you've witnessed while you were asleep. But if you can enter that consciously, then it's sort of like you're bypassing death in the normal sense, where you don't experience it perhaps as the same as most people. That's all I would have to say about it. That is what would happen if you were to shift permanently and don't come back. So what will happen if I shift permanently and don't come back here? Well, perhaps what they're also wondering is what does actually happen when, you pass away. Well, I think the easiest and most perhaps comforting way, and this depends on the person of course, but I think that understanding that sleep and death are closely related should give you some insight. Now, if you've been having a lot of nightmares, then perhaps the idea of this doesn't sound that appealing, where you're like, so if I pass away, maybe I'll be in a nightmarish realm, like my dreams at night. Well, you could also look at this and wake up from it and realize that it's essentially like saying as if you're in hell, as if you're gonna go to hell, because that's a bad spot to be. Nightmares in that moment of time are like a sort of hell for our consciousness in which we are, messing around. But if you become aware that it is a hell of your own making, that nightmare, you can instantly stop it and change everything around for your own good. So if that's your worry, your fear, well then don't worry about it, because you wield the power to change your nightmares around. Perhaps for this moment in time you're incapable of doing it, but it is possible, and once that time comes, well, you'll feel a lot more powerful within your own consciousness and a lot more secure and less afraid. So again, death and sleep are closely related in the sense that in both cases your consciousness simply moves on to a different reality, a different dimension of life. That's really all there is to it. And yes, this dimension of life could be peace, total nothingness, for a little while perhaps. But out of that nothingness, you never know, maybe a new desire grows for something, and lo and behold, you either perhaps reincarnate, get rebirth, reborn into this world, or maybe somewhere totally else in this universe. That remains an interesting question to myself personally as well. The question whether you would truly be reborn only on this planet, or maybe somewhere else in the galaxy, in the universe itself. It's absolutely huge. We don't know that for sure. We can only speculate on it, that it may be possible. That obviously, but since the universe is so great, it could easily and might as well be possible. There's so much we don't know. But if we are taking into consideration what will happen if you shift permanently and don't come back here, well, you'll be going on your own eternal journey. It just keeps going on and on. Your consciousness keeps expanding. It's a evolution of spirituality, of consciousness itself that we're on as human beings. It's not so much about the physical evolution anymore, but mostly about the mental evolution of the mind. And this goes on and on. Consciousness is like a stream of energy going with and through your body right now. So when it shuts down, that stream of energy that makes up your consciousness goes on wherever it needs to go and wants to go. That's the great mystery of death. life after death, being aware after the body has shut down. There's enough stories about this that this is possible, that this does happen to people, and they call them near-death experiences, which will perhaps provide you some more insights on what actually happens if you were to shift. Even though these people didn't shift permanently because they came back, but they were technically considered dead by all, means. They weren't physically alive anymore, but they were still aware, and they saw fascinating things. How is that possible? Well, they weren't looking with their physical eyes. They were looking with their inner eyes. You could say the eyes of imagination or the eyes of the soul. You have physical senses, you have spiritual senses. And when we pass away, we start operating with our spiritual senses first and foremost. Right now, we're mostly operating with our physical senses. And that's the beauty of waking up, of discovering this power of who you really are. It's all part of your eternal journey. Death is not something to really worry about. I know from personal experience that it's a painful thing to witness, of course. And I can also imagine that perhaps to a certain extent it is a little scary and uncomfortable when the time comes, knowing that you're going to have to let go of this physical life that you've gotten so used to for over decades perhaps of your life. For most of us that will be the case. But then still it's not something to worry about because it's part of this eternal journey, and know that the universe has your back. It will not let you suffer truly. You are one with the universe. You don't have to worry about such mysterious matters because a mind greater than us all has already established this. Now that was just one of my takes on this question that I thought would be interesting to share through this video. And maybe you have something to add to it of your own, and you can do so in the comment section below. Now with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.